Welcome to the Take a Mulligan podcast with your hosts, Brian and Kenny Mulligan. We hope to encourage you not to quit and keep going. If you're at that place where you just want to stop and give up, don't. Second chances can happen. Try again and take a mulligan.
Welcome to another episode, and today we are diving into the topic of fatherhood. What does it mean to be a dad, and how does it impact our kids, the kids we have? So we're so excited to have another special guest with us today on our episode. It is our eldest brother, Barry. Thanks for joining us, Barry.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
It is good to have you here, Barry.
Thank you.
That shit's gonna be back in the studio, Brian. It's been a little while.
I know it has been.
Feels like forever. You know, we get on this roll, then it's like, okay, we take a couple weeks because we're ahead of ourselves and stuff like that. So
yeah.
So
here we are.
Since I remember, the what you say?
I said, here we are, though.
Yeah, here we are. So yeah, this topic of parenting. So I thought it'd be great to just share. I remember when I first became a parent, because I was the first one out of us, and I remember, and probably because we have a picture of it. But so our oldest son, Jason, was born, and, you know, here he came home with this baby, and it's like, what do you do with this thing? Because it's like, oh my goodness, you know, the new parent. But you three guys, so Sean, Barry, and Brian, you guys were all on the couch in our rented apartment, and I forget which one of you were holding Jason, but you were like, you all had this look at, okay, what do we do this thing? Because it was like, I don't know, like probably when was the last time we held a baby, right?
When Brian was little.
Cousins, yeah, or,
Yeah.
or one of our cousins, I think, probably Sharon and Rich. That's probably the youngest ones I remember.
That is true. Maybe one of
being
them,
around.
right?
Yeah.
It had to be like 20 years, right? 15 years.
Well, that, and I guess EJ, when he had Matthew, right? Was that, or is Matthew younger?
That's
or is he
true.
older? No, Matthew's younger than, Jason, right?
Don't remember. But I don't remember holding them.
Well, I remember, like, we talked with their Labor Day picnic. I remember being around Matthew when he was little. But, yeah, I don't know if I remember him that little. So, yeah, I'm sure Jason was the first one in a long time that we held. And, of course, like I said, I was only, like, probably 13 at that time.
You were young when we got married. So why don't we give our listeners just a little background on each of us, because each of us have a different amount of kids and different sexes and everything like that on that. So I don't know, Barry, you want to start off? Tell
Yeah, sure. I have three boys, 29 this summer, just turned 26, the middle one, and the youngest will be 23 this summer. We lost a couple between the second and last child, so we think we got a couple of daughters in heaven.
Okay. Wow.
That's a good thought.
How'd you,
All
Barry?
right, Ken. Oh, all right. So I have 4 children. I have 2 boys, 2 girls. My oldest son is 24, married, so I have a daughter-in-law there. My next son is 22, and I have a daughter who is 19 now, and my youngest daughter is 13.
Wow. And then we have 5. So our oldest is, I think we're in the odd year this year, because that's the easiest way I remember it. So I think we're in 33, and the next one's 31. So we have 2 older sons, and then our daughter Nicole, she would be 29 this year, I guess, coming up. Wow. And then Victor under her, so the third boy would be 27, and then our daughter Leanne turns 23, I guess, because there are 4 years difference between those two. So everybody was 2 years apart, and then the 4. So what do you guys think? What's like the best part of being a dad? I'll just start on the positive stuff and all the fun stuff. And
Walking through the life stages as they change, seeing them at different time periods, and that's more fun that you have video captured for a lot of that stuff, so you can go back and watch it again. And a lot of that's lost in memory, so to see it brings it back. But to see the development from one stage to the other, the interests, the personality emerging out of that whole thing. And I think that the challenge for us as parents is to figure out how to best approach each one, since they are different. And this one needs that, and the other one needs something else. So the same parenting approach per child just doesn't seem to cut it. It's very individualized, very relationship based. And I would say that now that they're adults, it's even more fun. because we get to do things together more or less like peers. And, the conversations are a lot different and they're a lot more involved, and they have to do with life issues that the three of us, or when Sean's with us, we get to talk about. So it's just kind of raised the conversation level from what it used to be when they were little.
Yeah, I would say, very similar. It's I think my favorite age of my kids, and even other kids I'm around, is really honestly two to four, 2 to 5. I know that's also the most challenging age, but I just love that age because they're becoming their own little person, and they're finding out exactly who they are, and they're so exploratory at that age. They're just everything. They're into everything because they're trying to figure out what life is all about, and what things do and how they can do things, and they're just so adorable at that age. But I agree with you, Barry. I think it's been very interesting because, again, I have a 10-year gap between my oldest and youngest. So my youngest being 13 and in 7th, now 8th grade, and my oldest being married and living away from home. It's a little weird that we're kind of in this big gap in there. So it's been really interesting to kind of, for me, I think, as far as the ages go, is kind of learning what you were saying, the adult ages with my sons, even my daughter who's 19. Like, we've had a lot of adult conversations over the last couple of years as she's gotten older and more mature. And then with my boys, yeah, like you said, I mean, doing things together and almost like peers and having very different discussions, but then still having a 13-year-old that is not quite there yet. It's been kind of interesting because sometimes I forget, like, oh, we can't have the same conversation there yet. But I do look forward to that. But I think it is, like you said, it's so interesting how different they all are and how different their needs are. And I think that is one of the probably the biggest challenges of parenting, is trying to figure that out along the years. Because when they're younger, you just keep thinking, oh, they're babies, they're 2, they're 5. This happens when they're 5, and then you start to recognize, like, that doesn't really work, that we treat them all the same, because, like you said, they are all so different. So I think the best part, honestly, is just being a dad, just knowing that I have kids that love me unconditionally. Different times they probably don't love me just as much, but but overall, I know that I have a family that's there, that we've created a family that God has blessed us with, and just to know that I have a family, I can't imagine life without kids, because they're really my whole world.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up that gap thing, though, because that's something we experienced as kids growing up, was the gap. Because
Yeah.
was there 16 years? Is that what it is between all of us?
Yeah.
58 to 73 or 72? 70, 72,
birth
right?
years,
You
you
were
mean?
born 72?
I was 73. Yeah.
73, so it's 58 to 73. So what is that? 15 years?
Yeah.
That's a big gap.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
we've
so
talked about that. Me and you, Ken, are 10 years apart, and that's the same as, Zach and Mia, my youngest and oldest. So, now look at us doing a podcast together. And as I told our oldest sister when I was 15 and she was 30, I said, "Oh, I'm always going to be half your age." So that didn't really work out that way, though.
Just once, I
So,
think.
yeah. So there's that 15-year gap.
yeah, it's a big gap, man. Yeah, and it's it's interesting because I watch it with our kids, is trying to, in some ways, help them navigate a little bit that difference. That when our youngest was still at home, the others were off in their own little world because they were out of the house, they were at college, they were now in careers, and you really have to rebuild those relationships, because if you don't, then you'll drift, right?
Yeah.
So I think we all had to do that, right? I mean, we had to intentionally take time to want to hang out together, to be together, to keep the relationships going. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us as siblings, like you said in another podcast we did, was it, it was like two families. It was, me, Sean, and Denise were the younger end, and then, you guys and Patty were the higher end. So it was like you guys were off in high school doing your own thing. You were kind of barely around much when I was kind of growing up. I mean, I only remember you, Bear, pretty much from late high school into college age, because that's when I became more aware of what was happening with you guys when I was starting to get a little bit older.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next question then. So what were your first thoughts on the moment you found out you were going to be a dad, and the moment you actually became a dad?
I didn't get to share my experience.
Oh, go ahead. Your favorite part about being a dad, Ken? Go.
No. So actually, I was gonna say, I think what you guys hit on it was the relationship aspect, and I think one of the coolest things I'm telling every young parent I run into now is the best phase is when they're adults. Like I really believe that. Like I loved every moment. So if you ask me the best phase, I think the best time was when you come home from work and your child comes running to the door and says, "Daddy." I don't think
Yeah.
anything can. I think you compare to that feeling. Like, oh my goodness, their whole world revolves around you coming home, and then they get to see you, kind of thing. And it's like because that changes, and
Yeah.
then it's like, oh yeah, that's but in those first few years, it really is amazing. And you guys are all hitting on the whole thing of each one is unique, and I think that's one of the hardest things of parenting.
Yeah.
Is they're each unique and trying to figure out their how they operate, how they respond. But it does go, it goes back to that scripture verse that as parenting tip, right, to train up a child in the way they should go. Trying to determine their direction and what best way to help guide them and discipline in that direction so that they become the child and then the adult you want them to, right?
Yeah. All right. So now we'll jump into the next question. So, what was your first thought on the moment you found out you were going to be a dad, and then the moment you actually became a dad? So, start with you, Bear.
I'm not sure if I remember the moment we found out, although I do remember wanting to be creative in communicating it to the rest of the family. Because by then, Kenny had already taken a few options. It's like, okay, how can we do this a little different so that we don't tip our hand too quickly when people are like, what is it that you're saying? Or what's that T-shirt? Or that was part of the challenge. It got worse as the years went on because everybody did everything. So we had to repeat at some point. But I do remember being in the hospital pretty clearly for my first. And I purposely got a T-shirt beforehand that said "Rookie Dad," and so I wore that when he was born. We were bringing him home. It was, I guess, it was a bit. So this is what our parents kind of experienced when we were born. This sense of awe and we're really responsible for this little thing. I don't remember being as fearful, at least initially, as maybe later on, but just the this is ours. We made this. How is that even possible? And so you're backing into creative issues and image of God issues, and some of those deeper realizations as you see a child like that and say this is much bigger than us, and it's not just about the two of us now. So I think it was. Now I was a little older too when I got married, so that kind of helped gain some perspective beforehand and kind of maybe level out a few things in my own thinking. But I would say that the birth part of it, or past the birth part, because that wasn't fun, but the we're entrusted with this little soul, and what an amazing thing that was.
Yeah, it's such a miracle, isn't it? Like mind-boggling.
So, do you remember, Ken, your reaction when you found out?
I remember a lot of reactions. Finding out, yeah, I can almost like remember the phone call because Julie called me and she was going to take the test that morning, and so she's like, "Yeah, it was positive." I just remember I remember being in shock, and there's that sense of overwhelmingly like, wow, there's a joy there, and yet and I think you hit on it, Barry, is that overwhelming sense of, oh my goodness, this is responsibility, because when it's two of you as adults and married, it's like, okay, you both pull your weight, you do your thing, and all of a sudden it's like, we really wanted Julie to stay home with our kids at least as long as we could. And so now it was just not only being parents, but it was like, oh my goodness, now I'm the full breadwinner. Like, how are we going to do this? Like, oh my goodness. So yeah, there was a incredible fear attached with this joyous moment. And then, on the flip side, Barry, you brought up the hospital thing. And like, I remember that, I remember going back up into the hospital, like, because the hospital we had Jason at, like, they had 24/7 visiting hours for dads. Like, that wasn't the norm because you're the dad, and I felt like, oh, this is so cool. I can go up here anytime I want to, So coming there at 10 o'clock at night, whatever, because I'm the dad, But that incredible sense of leaving the hospital when it's now three of you, like all of a sudden your whole family dynamic has changed, and you're like, okay, this is really freaky. Like, this is like, wow, there's three of us. Like, oh my goodness. And we can't like just, it's not like a dog or a cat where you just leave them home or something for the day. You have to like take care of them 24/7. Like, it's amazing. Just that, that overwhelming thing.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of do remember when I found out. I believe we were both home, and kind of like one of the things, looking at the test and then being like, wait a minute, does that mean it's positive or does that mean it's negative? And trying to figure that out, because you're almost like, wait, do I want it to be positive? Do I want it to be negative? I'm kind of nervous, and then realizing it was, but then still like I've had a lot of experience with you guys having your kids prior to mine. You guys were actually, everybody was pretty much done except for Denise. At the time we had ours. So we had plenty of experience to watch all you guys. And I think it was more of one of those things where it's like, okay, well, it says positive, but maybe we just wait till we actually know when we get the confirmation from the doctor. So it was like one of those waiting games, but you still, had the joy and the excitement, but also the panic and the fear of it too. It's these weird emotions that come over you. And it's unless you go through it, you don't know exactly how to describe it. And you don't know how to explain it to somebody who doesn't go through it. And it is an amazing part, I think, of being a parent, is that first initial, wow, I'm going to be a dad. And it's really, it's a crazy feeling. And then, you go through the whole process of the pregnancy, then waiting and waiting. And, I just remember with our first, it was natural. And it was just like, oh my gosh, the water broke. Now what? Oh, we got to get to the hospital. And that was a very, very long delivery. It was like 26 hours, I think. So it was like a long time waiting for my first son to come. And then it's like, finally. That was more the reaction I think I had, was he's finally here, because the anticipation was like building like crazy. That whole long period of time that Kim had to go through that. And so I think for me, it wasn't like, yeah, he's here. It was almost like, finally, this is over. He's here. We got a son. So, and we didn't know the sex at that time. I mean, I don't think, did most of you guys find out? That wasn't like a thing then. We definitely didn't have a gender party thing where we just were going to reveal what the baby was, because we didn't know.
I didn't want to know for every single one of them.
I didn't want to know either. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't either.
Yeah.
It was like,
did
surprise.
You know for any 5 of yours? Did you know for any of yours? Either one of you? Okay. Yeah, we ended up finding out for the next couple, but well, my second one was so micro preemie, we ended up wanting to find out because we didn't know what the status was going to be when that was happening. And then after that, it was just kind of like, let's just find out. So we did know after that. But I like the anticipation of not knowing. I thought that was just an amazing thing. But I think, it's like different. Getting, yeah. And then again, it's like one of these things where it's like, well, wait a minute. Now where'd they go? They were supposed to take the baby and put him in the nursery, so we have a few hours of relief. And now we take him home. Now what happens? Where's the help? It's just us. And I do remember, like, you put the car seat and you're like, this is really surreal. Like you said, it's not just 2 of us anymore. It's 3 of us. But I think the coolest feeling about that was it was immediate, just to know immediately. And again, you can't explain this to somebody who hasn't had a child, unfortunately. The love that you find for a human being at the moment you see them and they're new to you, you can't even describe it. And it's just overwhelming to understand that, like, this child, I love them more than anything I've ever seen, and I don't even know them. And then to realize, like, now I'm responsible to take care of this child and to make sure that they're going to be okay. And I don't know how to do that because they didn't give us a book or anything. It's like there's no instruction manual. So you go home and now it's like, now what do we do? There's no nurses around. There's nobody around. It's just us. So it was very overwhelming, but it was also very exciting and lots of stress along the ways.
Yeah, the other thing I think looking back too is we were so young. Like, I mean, we weren't young, yeah. But
well, how old were you when you had your first?
What were we? 26, 27, I think.
Okay. And how long were you married by that point?
Just a little over 2 years, 2.5 years, something like
Okay.
that.
And how old were you, Barry, when you had Jordan?
Boy, let's see. 34.
Okay.
And we've
And
been
you were
married
married for
3
how
years.
long? 3 years.
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
but
I
you
was
still feel like you
25.
don't
We were
know anything.
married 3 years. Yeah. So
You were
you
married
know,
3 years.
yeah. So I think it was nice that we had that time before that too. Rather than just, having a baby right away and not having that time being married for a little while.
Actually, I was 33. 2
33,
days
okay.
later, I was 34.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, but you guys didn't feel prepared, did you? I mean, I
No,
didn't.
no,
I
not at
think
all.
every phase I didn't feel prepared. Like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Yeah. Well, I
And
think
part
again,
of it was good.
go ahead. I
The
was just going to
the
say,
weird part going in the car from the hospital, we had the seat
yeah,
set up. I made sure that was ready. But I do still vividly remember putting him in the seat and like, if we didn't do this right, there's nobody's going to tell us or check on this. So then what? And then
yeah,
driving home is like, okay, looking in the back seat, we're really allowed to take this thing home? Like nobody else has to check on this, or anybody going to check in on us and make sure we're doing this right? So that was going through my head.
yeah. And then each little stage is like so, stressful because you're like, oh my goodness, this baby's crying. It won't stop. I don't know what to do. Who do I ask? What do I do? Where's the book I go through to find this out? There's so much learning on the fly, and it's a wonder we don't need, like, any kind of license to have a child or to be a parent. But it just, I think for me, I had a lot of exposure with you guys because we had so many little ones around at that point. I
That's
mean,
true.
so let's see, we were already up to 10 grandkids, I guess, at that point. So, because Mia is the 15th, so my last one was the 15th. So, there was 10 kids around already by the time I had Zach, or no, maybe not. Well, close to it. Close to it.
Yeah.
We had enough around by the time I had Zach. But so we babysat. So it was. I guess that helped a lot because otherwise, if I just jumped in this, had no other baby exposure, yeah, I would have been really flailing.
Yeah, nursery at church, I think, helped a little bit.
Yeah. All right,
Changes
so
of
let's jump on to the
diaper.
topic of dad jokes. Father's Day episode here. Are you good at them? Do you use them? Do your kids recognize it? No.
Wow.
Not good at it. Don't use them. I'd be embarrassed to try. I don't
Yeah.
think I'd have that kind of sense of humor with the boys,
Well,
and I'd
here's the
rather not
thing, right?
embarrass them.
I think they're only dad jokes because we try to be a little funny in certain situations or try to be relevant still with them, and it becomes a dad joke. It's not like we're trying to make a dad joke, but I think
Yeah.
in my experience, I've learned how to actually make dad jokes now, and then my kids tell me that was a terrible dad joke. So I guess the real thing is it must have just developed naturally from dads making bad jokes and just got tagged as dad jokes. So
I think it's part of that generational gap thing. You're not as cool as you think
yeah,
you are, kind of thing. And our kids want to remind us of that.
yeah,
Well, they do say that, right? You go through that whole thing. There was a written document many years ago about, when I was young, I looked up my dad. He was my hero, and they get a little older, and there's this change in it, and then they get to the teen years. My dad knows nothing, and then
yeah,
he goes into his early adulthood, right? It changes perspective as you get older as a
yeah.
son,
Yeah. And all of a sudden, dad got smart again, right?
right?
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for
Yeah.
that
So,
phase for my kids.
playing off that though is like I don't know about you guys, but I find like you're always a dad still. Like
What do
they're
you
still
mean?
they're still coming to you for advice on things, which is really cool.
Okay.
You know, I like the flip side of it too. I like going to our kids for advice. Like, oh, so what do you think about this? Because I really value your
Mm.
opinion on this. Because they're adults. They're all adults now. But I still like, every once in a while you get that feeling like, okay, I'm still dad because they asked, I don't know, should you change the furnace filter? How often do you have to change the furnace filter? Yeah. I think that was one of the things that hit me, and we could go into this for a little bit. But as I started to leave home and go off to college, was that fear of, oh my goodness, they're gone. Like, and they're not gone because you just don't realize that when they go off to college, because hopefully they'll come back around. But that fear of, oh my goodness, I didn't teach them that, and I didn't teach them
Yeah,
that, and I didn't teach them that, and I didn't teach them that, and And we live in a generation now where it's so different than many generations ago, where all the things around, like, and just take the house, like the normal maintenance around the house, like you have
Mm.
to change the furnace filters every season. You should make sure your, like the hoses for your, going to the toilet, into your sinks are changed out, maybe every 10 years, I mean, those kinds of things before they burst. And it's like, we just don't teach our kids that. Like, they have to learn on their own, because that's not like part of the regular parenting thing anymore, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I might dive into that a little bit more when we get to the end of the episode, because that's kind of part of what I would probably talk about more there. So you start talking about the advice and the dad advice. So how easy or difficult do you guys find it to give the dad talks or give the dad advice? Like, is that something that comes naturally? Is it hard to do and have those conversations with your kids?
We developed when the kids were growing up. We were deliberate, and part of it was deliberate because I didn't think our dad was as accessible on the deeper levels, and so I said I want to make sure that my kids can feel comfortable. I guess that was the key word: feel comfortable. It's nothing that dad did in our lives that I thought it's a generational thing. Certain things you don't talk about. You don't talk about sex. You don't talk about budgeting money. um, so I wanted to be deliberate, and we picked up materials. I think it was to focus on the family that had different books. I think 4 different books written starting around age 4 about sexuality, and it was written for that age, so that Sue and I were deliberate. And since we had agreed before the kids came, all right, if it's a girl, you're going to have the talks, and then if it's a guy, you're going to have the talks. So it was all my job since we had all boys, and I remember walking through the books with the boys little by little. And at some point, as they got older, that gave us a built-in forum to have that dad talk for sure, but to develop that, hey, anytime you have something on your mind, we're here for you. And if you can't talk to me, you can talk to mom. And later on, we would bring mom into the conversations on those books specifically so she could answer more questions about the female part of things. But I think that set a certain level because it's made it easier then to pick up as they grew older. We had established a certain rapport, I guess you could say, so that when it came to, hey, son, we're seeing something that's not looking too good in your life. Can we talk? Made that a little bit easier to do.
How are you, Brian?
Can. Oh, okay. So for me, I think when they were younger, having 2 boys first, and boys and girls are very different. I think it was more wanting to just spend time with them, be goofy with them, hang out with them. And even as they got into like 8, 9, 10-ish age, it was still trying to be more like that rather than trying to lay down like, hey, let me give you some dad advice. Let me give you some life lessons and stuff. And I think I did, looking back, I missed out on some of those opportunities to give more of those life lessons just in little pieces, nothing like lecturing. But I think it wasn't until once Zach turned 13, I think that's when I started like writing them a letter. So like at 13, 16, high school graduation, college graduation, or whatever else in between, 18, something like that. So I tried to be very intentional with doing that. And for me, it was easier to just put things on paper. And in that, I found myself doing a lot of dad advice and, looking at life, differently and trying to make sure you're doing things properly, based on these or these things. And, would kind of give them a lot of advice and talks in those letters. And I think that opened it up for being able to have some of those other talks outside of that. But that was definitely the bigger thing that I started doing when my son went off to college. Wrote him a bunch of letters because it was the same kind of thing, at different times. And my other son, Noah, went to the Army. We wrote him some different letters, same kind of thing. He was away from home, wanted to give him some advice and those kinds of things. So I found that very, I guess, probably somewhat therapeutic to me to be able to say, okay, maybe I didn't tell them these things, so I'm going to put it on paper. And maybe on paper, it's easier for them to read through it than hear it from me, because they're not going to want to sit there and listen to me say this stuff. And that's pretty much true, because I've tried to have some of those conversations I would have put in the letter in person, and it just doesn't get received the same way. So I found that a little bit easier to do it that way.
Yeah, probably easier on both of you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that was always my desire was, so I admire you for doing that because I always want to do that. Once they went through a milestone in life was like,
Mhm.
okay, let me write a letter. And man, I just was not good at that. I think some of our best conversations were probably when the kids started visiting colleges.
Mm.
So some of that started sophomore, junior year, that kind of thing, where you're starting to go off. And there are many times where, Julie was either working or staying home with the other kids because they were younger. So I would get a chance to, drive somewhere far with one of the kids and we get a long conversation. And then some of that I kept going when they, were taking them back and forth to colleges because most of our kids went, 3 to 5 hours away for college. So I think those are one of the times that I think I enjoyed them. One of them, I guess, enjoyed a lot in parenting was those conversations that we had on those long rides. And it's not like I guess what I found is you can't force a conversation,
Mm.
but when the environment comes together, it naturally just happens. And so, I know I've learned that later in life was, create the environments as many as you can because then those things would happen. But I think the environment driving them to college or something like that, or driving back from a college visit or something like that, created those environments for me, which was really nice.
Yeah, there was a adaptation of a concept that you've heard about the whole time and spending time with kids. I mean, in addition to kids spelling time, LOVE, that kind of thing, there was the adage years ago. It's not quantity time, it's quality time, and I like never quite bought that. And I said, I understand what they're trying to say, but I think a better approach is quality time is an accident that happens in the middle of quantity time.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a good way to
That's a
put
great
it.
way to say it.
Yeah. So how do you think, now Barry, you had all boys. So was that, I don't know, was that a challenge and how do you change, like, how does that relate to you, Brian, with, having a couple girls, couple boys? So like, what was the difference you found as parenting?
To this day, my wife says, I'm glad we had boys because girls would be really hard. And she just sees it amongst some of the, the other families that we know, and they have teenage girls, and the things that concern them are very different. Uh, we we didn't we had it really easy. I don't know. I can't take credit for any of that. They're wired that way. But the boys generally got along growing up, and outside of certain stages, where additional cousins would get in the mix, and it would create some tension or whatever. It was just a growing up thing, 2 and 3 year old that was kind of rough. And they had a couple of cousins that were the same age who also wanted it their way. But we didn't have a tough time. What was the tougher time was probably balancing and looking back, the oldest feeling different when the second one came. So that trying to navigate, the newness of the new one and not let the older one feel a little bit out of sorts. And then there was another part of me in my head was saying, yeah, but we had you all by yourself for, 2 or 3 years or whatever. Nobody's going to have that. And so you can't reason with a 2 or 3 year old, but in my mind, I'm saying, just chill for a little while. Let's play with your younger one because you had your time. And so let us videotape his little thing going on for you. I remember some of that being a little bit weird. And I feel bad for the oldest sometimes because you look back at the old videos and you're like, oh, I think he was kind of upset about that. But there's not much you could do at that point. But we had it really, really good. I don't know what it would have been with like girls. I think part of the reason we didn't get girls is because I would have been a mess. I think I'd worry too much for them or something like that. So I was spared that. But I miss because I won't ever have the whole walking her down the aisle thing. I won't. I don't have the daddy's little girl thing, and I mourned that loss years ago. But I had to actually go through that process. Say, okay,
Mhm.
Lord, you're in charge. I'm not. This is what we have, and let's be thankful for it. And we really are.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you, Brian?
So for me, it was interesting because having two boys first, and then my two girls, it was, again, lots of cousins around, lots of exposure to kind of the differences, and We had, 3 nieces through Denise. And so it was kind of an interesting dynamic because, Zach and his cousin Madison, they're like a year apart. So it was a weird comparison because we're brand new parents. That's their third child. So they were so close in age, and it's like there was a lot of comparisons happen, and kept thinking like, are we doing something wrong? What's going on here? Why isn't he able to do what she can? He can't sit still like she can. And so it was weird. You kind of kept thinking like, are we doing something wrong here? So then, time went on, and then his brother was born. So then we had the two of them, and that was a blast. I loved having my two boys to, rough around with, and it was just so much fun. And, the things that we would do, the goofy stuff we would do. And then all of a sudden I had my daughter, and that was just like, it was, again, this is something you can't really explain or describe to somebody because I didn't even know what to think of it. The moment she was put in my arms was like, it felt completely different. It just felt so different. I mean, I love my sons. I want to protect them for sure. But there was this sense of overprotection when I held her in my arms compared to my sons. It was just a very overwhelming feeling of like, this one I got to make sure I take care of for sure. And it was just it was a really cool feeling. And it's just a different relationship with my girls than with my boys. And it always has been. And, you have a different relationship with each one of them in different ways. But it was very, very different. And then as my daughter was, getting older and watching her and toddler age and stuff, I'm like, wow, there is a huge difference. Like she actually can sit and watch TV show for like a little while where the boys are all over the place. So it took me too long to recognize that, which is a sad part because it really took me that long to recognize. So there's a 4-year difference between Noah and Brooke, who's my oldest daughter. So it took a while to recognize like, wow, my boys, they were boys. They weren't really doing anything wrong. They were just boys. They were different. And now this girl acts very different. So it really, that's when it hit me. I mean, being around cousins and nieces and nephews, like, you could see it. But when you had your own, it was really like shockingly different to understand that and recognize like, wow, God made us completely separate for different reasons. And you could see it so obviously when you have a boy and a girl and recognize that. So then when my second daughter came around, it was kind of, the exact same feeling. As soon as she was born, hold her in my arms, like, wow, this is a very different feeling again than when I held my boys, and gotta take care of her better as well. And then just the fact of knowing that I had two girls that could be together, two boys that could be together. They had the brother sister thing going on, so that was really cool.
That is cool. Yeah, they are definitely different. That's for sure. And I think you brought up the cousins thing, and I think boy, looking back on the early years, we experienced that pretty hard because we had the boys first, and then all of a sudden there were girls that came into the cousins mix, and yeah, the girls sit there and they just play, and the boys want to get up and run and do things, and I really looking back, I thought our boys were pretty easy too, but they were boys. They want to go,
Yeah.
they climb the tree. You go out on a path and they want to climb up the hill. It's like, I don't want to stay on the path. I want to climb the hill, and it wasn't like we couldn't, manage them to say, no, we're going to stay on the path now and we climb the hill later. But you realize that they're boys and you just let them be boys, let them explore, let them be rough and tough when they want to, that kind of thing. But yeah, I remember that it was a little tough being around the family dynamics because our boys were boys and then there was the girls, I think in our own mix, they were all so different. And we talk about all this all day, all day long about how different they are. But every one of us is so unique. So Jason was into the sports, and then Kevin, our second oldest, he broke his leg when he was
2 or 3, right?
Yeah, just on cusp of his third birthday, and that gave him a personality change. I mean, he was the rough and tough kid that wanted to go out there and keep up with his older brother, and then all of a sudden he went from that to a very sedentary kind
I
of kid.
remember that change. Yeah.
Wow, what a significant thing. And again, he has his own personality, which is so cool. And then obviously our daughter was the third and totally different again, and she was easy, as a third child. And I remember the doctor telling us that third child is always easy. So yeah, I think each of them were, again, as you were hitting on, Barry, they're all so unique, and even though they can be boys or girls, each has a unique personality, and it's interacting with them in a different way, you know. But I think, Brian, you brought up such a great point too. I think parents have to realize that there is such a difference between boys and girls, and you have to train them that way. You know, even if girls like play sports and all that kind of stuff, or you know, they don't do the typical things or whatever, but they're still girls and they're still boys, you know, and they're going to be
Yeah.
different. So
Well,
how
we're
do you
really
think
running
that?
through here.
How do you think? Yeah, the boy, time's flying. So how do you think
Yeah.
that influenced you guys? Like our
Hmm.
dad. Like how do you? Barry, you hit on that a little bit, but what are some of the things you think, right or wrong? I mean, I think one of the things, and we can spend a whole episode on this because I think we're going to talk about our
Yeah.
dad a little bit more and growing up. But I think one of the things that I realized when we started having kids was I looked at dad as a more as myself now, as a parent now raising kids. And then I looked at him raising me, like all of a sudden he had that concept, like, oh wow, this is what dad went through. And all of a sudden, all the things you thought maybe he wasn't the greatest dad at, or he messed up, or he was too busy, or all that kind of stuff, all of a sudden it took it in a whole different perspective. Like it was like, wow, you know. But I think one of the things, I don't know, if one of the things I think positive that I think that influenced was wanting the best for your kids. You know, I really do believe Dad wanted the best for us in our lives, and he didn't always know how to show that. But I think that was something Dad instilled. I think in me was, you want the best for your kids, and you hope you can encourage them and inspire them to get there. You know.
How about you, Bear?
Um, the one thing I mentioned earlier was the piece that I wanted more, because I didn't get it from him, which was the more heart to heart stuff. We had a couple of very good conversations, but that's two I remember. I don't remember more than that, and I wish I had more. So it was accessibility, I guess, was the key. He was a more private person, and I would, especially now with as we're getting older, and as Sean, our other brother, loves history. I wish I could pick his brains a little bit more about his time in the Army and just what life was like during the Depression and things like that, which we didn't get to talk about much. So part of it was an accessibility that I wanted to have with my kids that I didn't really have with Dad. And I don't blame him for it. It was just the way it was. But the one thing that was very specific, and it stayed with me all along, is from him a pursuit of excellence. He was meticulous to a fault and fried mom circuits most of the time. Uh, but that pursuit of excellence is something that I saw in him and I wanted. And
Yeah.
from an earliest age, 10 or 11 years old, that's what I wanted too.
Hmm. I think for me, it's interesting because I mean, he was 47 when I was born. So, for me, it was, I already had an older dad. I mean, by the time I was, junior high, high school, everybody's like, oh, your grandparents came to the game today. That's nice. Yeah, that's my mom and dad. Because they might have been the oldest of their family. I'm the youngest of six. So, their parents could have been 35. And here I got a, dad who's pushing 60 in high school. So, it was very different. I think for me, I was always interested in sports. And I think for me, the one thing that I really wish I had with him was some interest in that. Would have loved to have like had a catch with my dad. And that was just something that I think I always wanted. But again, I understood that, just like you said, Barrett, just kind of the way it was. And I think he was a great dad. Again, I think accessibility was tough. He was always busy. It was hard to get time, I think, to chat with him. I don't remember a lot of heart to hearts at all. I think one of the biggest influences I would always have to say from him is his work ethic. I mean, that was like definitely the biggest impact he's had on my life and how I've lived my life is to understand and model the work ethic he had, because he did work very, very hard. Like you said, family was top important to him, and I've always tried to model that for my kids. The biggest thing I think I've learned watching him, learning from him, and trying to be a dad myself is similar to what you said, Barry, with your kids. Is I told them at a younger age, like, I never had these talks with my dad. I wasn't really interactive with my dad, and I really want that with us. I want to be able to talk to you guys. So please, let's talk about things and not keep this hidden, because I want to be that dad that actually engages with my kids and has that time. So I think it pushed me to really make sure that I went above and beyond to try to be there for them more often, try to come home from work at a decent hour, to make sure I wasn't missing out on those things, to not miss out on games or plays or other activities they were involved in. I think, growing up and recognizing, how he approached some of those things, I just wanted to do that a little bit differently. And again, no knock on him. I love him. He was a great dad. Miss him dearly. And like you said, I wish we could pick his brain a little bit more, especially as my kids got older. I would have loved to say, Dad, can you give me some advice on this or that? And I think that's a part I really miss that I would have loved to have been able to do had he been around a little bit longer. So
hey, as we wrap up, why don't we all share a maybe a piece of advice we can give some parents out there, and maybe tie it into, going back to the whole mulligan thing. If you could do something over in parenting, what would it be? Where do you wish you could have taken a mulligan? Maybe you did take a mulligan, but maybe, I don't know. I think from my standpoint, I think there's a lot of mulligans I wish I had taken and I never did because it's too late because they're older now. Stuff I did when they were younger. So I don't know. So what do you guys think? What's a mulligan you would have taken? What's some advice you can hand off to next generation of parents?
The mulligan would be to assess more accurately the scene you walk into when the two or three of them are jumping on the pillows and on the couches. Because I got myself into trouble with one of them, and I can't tell the story or I'll break down because it still hurts to this day. But I misunderstood what I saw and then accused one when the one who was trying to do the right thing was the one that got in trouble. And the other one who was doing the wrong thing got scot-free. So I would say stop, take a breath and assess more accurately what you're walking into on those different moments with your kids so that you can engage them properly. And the other thing I think I would do as far as advice was, we took seriously early on in our child rearing years too, that Bible verse about incorporating God into everything that you do. And it's basically, when you walk along the road and when you sit down on the side and when you lay down at bed. And I think that I took that literally. And so to enjoy the life stages of the kids at their different stages and to take advantage of those moments. Again, the car rides, like you said, Ken, the bike rides, the goofing off in the backyard, the little bit of the pool party, to engage them. For us, we wanted to instill in them spiritual values. So when they're watching a TV show and something comes up, when somebody said something that hurt them, to take those opportunities and help them assess and understand the world around them, and that there is a God who loves them through those moments, and there's a God who's listening for them the way mom and dad are.
that's great. I think for me, I guess the advice first part I would say is just making sure that you're just constantly engaging in them, with them in different ways. We get so caught up in the housework and the yard work and the things that we have to do. We got to go shopping. All these different things that, really can be done different times, to put a pause on it and just engage with our kids. And I think I recognize that probably with my first son, Zach, when, he was young, 2-3 years old. And I'm like, I got to go cut the lawn. I got to do these things. And at one moment, I just stopped and I'm like, you know what? Let me put that aside. I'm going to take a break and spend time with him, and then I can go back to that. But had I just kept going, he would have done something on his own and missed that opportunity. And I think, everybody tells you it goes by fast, and it does. I mean, people told me that before I became a parent. Oh, it goes so fast. Never had any clue what that really meant until you have kids, and every little stage does go so fast. And in the blink of an eye, you're going to miss it. So just engage with your kids at whatever level they're at, whether they're 2, whether they're 16, whether they're 18, whether they're 20. Engage with them as often and as much as you can, and pay attention to them. Take the life distractions away. Now, today, it's the phones. Years ago, we didn't have those distractions when we were early parents, but Now get rid of them, put them down. You see so many parents that are at a kid's event, or a school function or a game, and the parents are there, but they're looking at their phone the entire time. They have no idea what's even going on. And I think we lose that. So we need to engage with our kids. We need to be aware of what's happening in their lives. And that's the only way we're going to know that, is by engaging with them. Just having them go through the motions of their daily routine and having no clue as to what they're dealing with, what they're going through. And I think trying to keep the communication open. And I think if they understand that you are willing to have the communication open, I think they're much more willing to actually communicate with you, rather than stepping back and saying, well, mom and dad don't really care anyway. They don't really want to hear what I have to say or what I'm going through. So as far as advice, that's what I would say. I would say take each moment as it comes and just cherish every moment you have with your child, because it does go very fast. And, again, what better example have we had than our Heavenly Father? That's a huge, huge shoes to fill to be a father like our Heavenly Father. And we're supposed to strive to be a dad like that. But it's hard. And I think going into my mulligan, I would say similar to you, Barry, just numerous times I wish I could take back how I reacted to the kids, what I reacted for, why I reacted that way. So inappropriate. At times when the anger gets over you, you don't understand the situation, you're just stressed and you react a certain way. And I think what I tried to do, and maybe this is another little piece of advice, would be apologize. Humble yourself and apologize. I tried to do that early on. It's hard sometimes, but it's just to say, you know what, I was wrong. I lashed out. I shouldn't have done that. I yelled at you. I punished you more than I should have. But that's, I think that's an important piece too, because I think we do miss that if we don't ask their forgiveness and help model that routine as well. Again, looking at our Heavenly Father who forgave us when we ask forgiveness, He forgives us. So we need to model that with our kids. And I think the only other piece of a mulligan I would say is to have back would be either better, more often, or sometimes less often discipline in certain situations, because I think that really sets the modeling for our kids. And I think we're, again, in our society today, I don't know how much of that we're getting. And I wish we did a better job of not necessarily being harder on them with discipline, just being maybe a little bit more consistent with how we approach that. So that's probably my biggest mulligan.
Wow. If I could take a mulligan, I'd take the whole thing over. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like, it went so fast, and you look back, it's like, man, I wish I'd done that in that phase. I wish I'd done that in that phase. I wish I'd done that in that phase. I wish, we even stuff like, stupid little stuff like, we started buying the kids tools for Christmas, right? Like, and I was like, man, why didn't I think of like, okay, when they turn 1, we get the hammer. When they turn 2, they get the screwdriver. When they turn 4, and I didn't think of that. So it was a random tool, but it was like, man, if I had thought through that, by the time they hit 18, they would have had a nice complete tool set, But you just don't think of it on the, So I really wish you could go back and do it all again. And so I think one advice I guess I'd probably give to other parents is, and Barry, you hit on it, was, you wish dad and mom were around to ask the questions. And I think is asking advice to the older generation to try to, and I know sometimes that's tough because some of us may not have the greatest relationship with our parents, but that might actually recreate that or build that stronger when we go to our parents and say, hey, we're struggling with this. And I know you probably did it all different. Can you just listen? And can you give me some advice? Because, they have advice. They have some wisdom because they've gone through some of those things before. And we may have a totally different approach to parenting, but there's still some wisdom in what they've experienced and gone through. And I think it'd be nice to listen to the older generation and to ask the stories before they're too old and they're gone and you can't ask them, The other thing that hit me too, and Brian, I think, well, you both hit it on. That's why I want to bring it back around. Was you said enjoy the moments. There's a catchphrase we got from one of the kids programs we learned, and was it's just a phase. Don't miss it. And I love that, because every phase is, and you might think, okay, they're a newborn. I can't handle the cry. I can't handle the cry. And all of a sudden one day it's gone. And if you don't take the time to recognize it and enjoy that moment, however hard it may be, it's gone and that will never come back again. And so enjoy every phase of it. And tying into that, and this is really advice I got from our kids. And it was, you talk about instilling spiritual life into our kids. And I think one of the things our kids walked away with was they heard us talk about God a lot. They were involved, obviously, in the church and all that kind of stuff. But they never saw what we wrestled through with God. And I think that's so important, that, man, I'm wrestling with this thing with God. And to see that in our lives, that'll help them to grow in their faith, because they might realize, okay, Dad doesn't have it all together. Dad's still struggling with his faith, even though he's older and should be instilling this in me. But it gives them a different picture of God, that, it's a continual journey of getting to know God and who he is. So I guess that's what I would leave with. So any final words, guys? You want to leave? No, you guys are good. Okay. So next our next podcast, we have, we're so grateful you guys are all joining us with us today. Next podcast, we have a very special guest that Brian and I invited onto our podcast. And so you don't miss the next episode. We're going to be airing actually on July 2nd for the 4th of July episode. And it is AC Quintera, and he's going to tell you about what it means to be a refugee. And so really a neat perspective on freedom. So it's an episode you don't want to miss. So thanks for joining with us. And we're glad you're here today.
Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there, and all the dads that are not official dads but have a role in a child's life, because it's important. So thanks for being a dad, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, we know everyone can use a second chance or a do-over, so take a mulligan. Try again. Thanks so much for joining with us today. Make sure you follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Like, click, and subscribe.